Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. Your host Pushpendra Mehta. Joining me today are Jack Large, editor of CTMfile, and Ben Poole, writer at CTMfile. Welcome back, Jack and Ben.
Thanks very much, Push.
Good to be here.
Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts with us on topics that impact the world of cash and treasury management. It's time to dig deeper and get insights from you on our topics for today, namely, how can treasury overcome blind spots, working capital technology, supply chain resilience and security, German economy slipping into recession, and falling inflation in the United Kingdom. Our audience can read articles, interviews, and industry roundups by visiting ctmfile.com or by following the links in our show notes. Let's get started with our conversation. Our first story for today is about how treasurers must avoid building an echo chamber. Building off the ebook titled The Guide to Excellence in Treasury by CTMfile and Strategic Treasurer, a leading treasury consulting firm, the ebook, The Guide to Excellence in Treasury, provides valuable insights on a range of treasury topics. With treasurers facing a cavalcade of challenges over the past 3 years, spotting and overcoming blind spots is important. If left unaddressed or unchecked, blind spots can lead to disastrous consequences for the entire organization. The ebook recommends that treasurers to surround themselves with a team whose opinions vary, lest they construct an echo chamber that reinforces blind spots. Jack, what do you think treasurers can do to see past their limiting viewpoint or opinion?
I think for me the most important thing in this article was, and in the ebook, is that you need to recruit a varied team. And the other thing is that you don't have to be scared about recruiting somebody better than yourself. I remember a manager who worked for me. He interviewed one of the people that we were thinking of employing, and he said, "Oh no, I wouldn't." And I dug deeper. And what was the problem was he was scared of him because he always asked, "So what? What does that mean?" And it's people like that you need inside the team. The article also makes the important point that it isn't just the open people, it's the quiet people, the introspective people you need as well. And it's the combination, balance of the different skills and ways of working, I think is so important. Otherwise, blind spots get you in real trouble.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with what Jack said there, and kind of the overall point around diversity in treasury hiring is very important. As any team will benefit from a greater collective knowledge and insights in a team, I think, it just gives you more ways of looking at a problem and finding a solution. And that's something you can apply to so many different areas of life. I mean, AI is everywhere at the moment in the news. And that's an example where, smart technologies like that need to understand the breadth and scope of all human life, and that's not just so that chatbots don't suddenly become racist, although obviously we want to make sure that they don't do that. But it's also considerations like customer experiences and services, considering who the actual end customer is that's being interacted with, not just a generic human, in air quotes, who will most likely be a middle-aged white man like myself. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about not only your team around you, but also the people that you're interacting with as well. And getting back to the treasury point specifically, I was thinking about this and in terms of how treasury can benefit from hiring the latest generation of the workforce, very recent graduates that will have some sort of finance deployment. Might not specifically be in Treasury, but that's always, I think we all know treasurers that have kind of moved around a finance department before they found Treasury and made that their home. And if you look at the generation Z or Z for our US listeners, that workforce, they probably have a far better handle on technology just innately than someone like I do, for example. And by engaging with younger Treasury professionals and making sure that they're encouraged to question things and to ask why whenever they see something that doesn't make sense or something that, they think, well, why don't we do it this way? It's a great chance to review processes and systems because it's that point again. They'll come at it with a different lived experience, a different perspective. And on the flip side, you can go right to the other end of the knowledge base, if you like, and maybe get someone that has some experience in data science into the mix, particularly with the way that Treasury is going at the moment in terms of digitization and preparing for the real-time Treasury. So I think that, there's so many different ways that this situation can be approached. And also on the overcoming blind spots question, finally, I think engaging with other teams and staff in the business is vital as well. Treasury isn't an island, and so much of this data that we talk about that Treasury is relying on comes from these other stakeholders in the business. So it could be sales or procurement or any other business unit. So it's good to actually have that level of understanding and knowledge. And it's a great opportunity to explain and educate why Treasury is doing what it's doing and why you want this specific information on this specific format or at that given time can just help demonstrate what Treasury is doing, not only for Treasury itself, but for the business as a whole. So yeah, there's lots to think about in that ebook, I thought.
The other point I'd like to make is that the other facet of Treasury is that we're now seeing multi-country Treasury teams. In other words, they don't all come and meet up each day or each week in the same office. They're quite often continents away. And it's trying to blend the different pieces together to make, as the article says, Treasury is transitioning from being a reactive to proactive growing influence with the advisory board. And that role becomes even more important if you can bring multi-country perspectives to it. I think there's a lot here in this article.
Those are very valuable perspectives. And, both of you mentioned technology. Moving forward to our next story, which is about working capital technology for corporates. This story is about Barclays investing in brand new working capital technology for corporate clients. Barclays has announced that it is further developing its working capital offering by investing in and implementing Trade Ledger's working capital orchestration platform. This platform will provide end-to-end credit management automation for Barclays corporate clients in the UK and around the world. Ben, given that you covered the Barclays story for CTMfile, how do you think will investing in and implementing the tech-enabled working capital platform benefit Barclays' corporate banking clients in the UK and worldwide?
I think it's part of a trend that we're seeing in terms of bank investments in technology and fintechs that deal in this specific area. Trade Ledger's software slots into lenders' existing technology and provides oversight on loan products and will analyze data to provide information around areas such as credit risk. And I think banks have definitely woken up to the fact that they need a clear digital strategy if they want to be able to grow their trade finance businesses, which is one of the sort of can be one of the more lucrative sides of an overall banking business. This news is one example of this. We had the Citi and TIS partnership earlier in the month was another example, and there's a lot of them out there. I think the overall trend is good news for corporates. There's lots of positives that you can extrapolate if you look at how this might work, perhaps receiving lending decisions faster. They might be able to gain access to finance quicker as well, and potentially find ways to lower costs through the efficiencies that such technologies like this deploy. So there's good news at the end of the pipe for the corporate clients. But obviously this is all going on between the smaller tech firm and the larger bank.
The other issue here is, and I think it's an overriding one with technology, is that how good are Barclays going to be at using this? Okay, the Ledger platform uses all the latest technology and API all the way through to total SaaS oriented. But it's how do Barclays use it? How does the account manager work out what the output from this capital orchestration platform? My God, they're dreaming, working capital orchestration platform. How does Barclays account manager use this? That's the question. I don't think the issue is how good the technology is, or is this the way it's going? It's how do people use it on the ground, the account manager on the ground. If he gets output he doesn't understand, the corporate is not going to get much. I think a lot of this depends on the training and implementation inside Barclays.
Absolutely. And it's something that corporates can, if you're hearing this and you are a Barclays client, go and speak to your relationship manager and ask them, how's this going to affect what I do? What can you do for me with this new information, this new tool that you've got at your disposal? And if they don't know, then, suggest they go and find someone higher up the chain that can find out how you can actually make the most of it.
Agreed.
Implementation is the key. Let's move forward to the next topic that pertains to trade ministers from 14 countries in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, led by the United States, that have agreed at a pact aimed at improving supply chain resilience and security. The IPEF participating countries are viewing this as an attempt to decrease their dependency on China and prepare for potential future supply chain challenges. Jack, what do you think of the supply chain accord, and how do you think this can impact corporate treasury?
Well, as somebody who's based in the UK, has lived all my life in the UK, the big feature here is UK is not in this. The US is the only non-Eastern bloc area in this. It's appalling. It's just absolutely appalling. The other thing I think is that, I need to come back to it, we're just, UK is isolated. We left Brexit, we left the EU, and now we're not in councils like this. I mean, the crises that this supply chain group are preparing for is definitely coming. There is going to be some form of ganging up on China and manipulating of how much power China has. For example, Apple is rapidly moving a lot of their manufacturing as fast as they can out of China and into India and Vietnam and places like that. It's just an example. I think this is very important. The trouble is I worry about the consequences.
Yeah, you can see it's very clearly sort of pushed through by the Biden White House specifically to engage with as many Asian countries as possible, excluding China. And I think that I read somewhere that all of the countries that are involved in the IPEF account for around 40% of global GDP. So a sizable collective. Worth noting, it isn't a free trade deal, and it does steer clear of certain tariff arrangements and other traditional sort of market opening tools. It's going to be intriguing to see how it works in practice. I mean, obviously, supply chain snarl-ups were one of the big headlines out of COVID. And that affected everyone in every country, not just in the countries in this agreement. That I think that it's interesting that they want to try and provide early warnings to the countries involved of potential supply chain disruption. Fascinated to see how that works and just how flexible supply chains can be to act on these warnings. Like, what do you just go, oh, well, I guess I won't be able to ship that now, or are you actually able to act on it and swiftly and adeptly divert your supply chain as a result? It's really interesting, but I wait to see.
Nothing happened speedily. I mean, these guys have been negotiating since quarter 22, and they've only just come up with their first stage of the negotiations. So how you move supply chains quickly is beyond me.
And of course, we do have an American election coming up next year, and we did have Obama try something sort of similar, which swiftly got ripped up by Trump as soon as he came in. So good luck, IPEF. We look forward to seeing how long he might last.
From supply chain resilience to our next story, which is about recession. The fourth story for today is about Europe's largest and the world's fourth largest economy, Germany, slipping into a recession. Data from the German Statistics Office showed a downward revision to GDP from 0 to negative 0.3% for quarter one. The fall followed a 0.5% contraction in the last quarter of 2022, making 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth that define a technical recession. Analysts put the latest contraction down to a combination of high energy prices triggered by Russia's war in Ukraine and apparent structural weaknesses in the country's economic foundation, which its coalition government has struggled to fix. Ben, do you think Germany will prove a drag on the Eurozone's overall economic prospects until at least 2024 or beyond?
I think it's a little early to say that, potentially. I mean, I know that technically Germany is now in recession with those 2 consecutive quarters, but I think there's a lot of that going around. It's not really surprising to see growth suffering so much with the heady mix of the high inflation and higher interest rates. I was thinking about the UK as a kind of a comparison, and we're not in recession over here in the UK, but we've had GDP growth of 0.1% in each of the past 2 quarters, which isn't exactly dramatic growth. Annual EU inflation in April was at 8.1%, which is coincidentally the exact level it was at the previous April, 2022. So the inflation problem is a long-term issue that the central banks are trying to wrestle with, while also, not squashing growth. It's a very delicate balancing act. It's not precise. It's not exact, So that's something that the ECB in the case over in Europe is having to gauge in terms of what it's doing with its hiking cycle. But I think, it's, 0.5% and then 0.3% negative growth for Germany. I mean, to be honest, I could see it being out of recession before this year's out. I just think it's so close to the line. It's just more of a symptom of the overall problem that many countries are suffering with at the moment.
Following on from that, these are structural problems. They're not just inflation-linked things like the price of energy and so on. It's actually the structures of economies are not fit for purpose in terms of how they're coping with this. In the UK Parliament, the Prime Minister was really pleased the IMF had said he was not in recession. What's the difference between 0.1 and being minus 0.1? And these figures aren't accurate anyway. It's spurious. The real issue is the fundamental structure of our economies are not working, and this isn't being tackled at all. In terms of what the corporate treasurer does about it, is I would be very cautious about investment and expansion in almost any market. I can't think of any market that naturally is going for growth. It's niche by niche.
I mean, the good news is I was actually over in Germany this past weekend, and the economic news didn't seem to be putting people off enjoying their seasonal festivals and purchasing several beers in the sunshine. So, I think as people, we also have to try and get on with life as normal as much as we can.
Absolutely. And if we win the Women's World Cup, there'll be a load of beer drunk in the UK.
Well, the underlying message is life moves on. And from Germany, let's move on to the UK, where we'll converse about the UK inflation falling to its lowest level in over a year, with the inflation rate as measured by the Consumer Prices Index dropping to 8.7% in the year to April from 10.1% in March, largely because last year's energy spike in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine dropped out of the annual comparison. Despite its fall to single figures, inflation in the UK is significantly above that of the Eurozone and the US. Jack, if you were a corporate treasurer with considerable exposure to the UK, would you be concerned that while the UK inflation rate has fallen below 10%, the food price inflation is at near historic high?
That's an interesting question. I think the answer is don't worry about it. That's not where the issue is. What we have is supply chain problems in terms of how we create energy, how we manage the move to greener, less CO2 production. It's not here. This is not the issue.
Yeah, this is, if anything, this links back to the previous story about the German story that we just spoke about, with their inflation. It's all these little pieces of economic data just kind of feed into the bigger picture for the central banks, and inflation, great that it's less than 10%, but with a target of 2%, it's not working. What's happening at the moment? So that's one point. And Jack's absolutely right that the UK has delivered itself a very specific set of circumstances to deal with on top of everything else that every other country is dealing with. Because why make things easier for yourself? And you were alluding to it, Push, you mentioned the food prices. I mean, that's been inflation over 19% in each of the past 2 months. And also the core element of this last inflation print, the core element excludes energy, food, alcohol and tobacco. That actually rose to 6.8%. And that's something that markets look at a lot when it comes to analyzing inflation. So rates are not being double digits, but it's, not time for a party either.
Not time for a party either. Finally, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week and why? Ben, if I can ask you to answer that first.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not sure if it's cheating, but I'm going to pick a story we've not spoken about today, but it is another supply chain related story following our chat about the IPEF earlier. But I did just want to mention that the International Accounting Standards Board, IASB, have issued some disclosure requirements around supplier finance arrangements. We ran this story in the industry roundup on CTMfile today, 31st of May. So you can find the details there. But basically the amendments supplement requirements already in IFRS accounting standards, and require a company to disclose the terms and conditions, ranges of payment due dates, liquidity risk information, and the amount of the liabilities that are part of the arrangements, breaking out the amounts for which the suppliers have already received payment from the finance providers, and stating where the liabilities sit on the balance sheet. So these amendments affect IAS 7 statement of cash flows and IFRS 7 financial instruments disclosures, and they're going to become effective for the accounting reporting periods beginning on or after the 1st of January next year, 2024. So that's definitely something for treasurers to just make sure they're aware of and evaluate how it might impact on their business and their specific reporting requirements.
For me, the abiding issue here is, and Ben has touched on it in a slightly different way, is that the standardizations of things like APIs, standardization of processes, standardization of how you deal with things, becoming more and more important at all sorts of levels in Treasury. And treasurers need to be abreast of that. The other thing is that I feel supply chains are so big that they need to be managed on a different way, and we're not getting this yet. We're scrabbling with the minor details. The real issue is the structure of what is managed. New standardization, I think, is needed. Maybe that's the best thing that will come out of the the Far East initiative here. But standardization is absolutely key.
Couldn't agree with you more, Jack. On that note, thank you, Jack and Ben, for your precious insights and your time. We would also like to thank our CTMfile audience for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you and have a great week. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTMfile or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.